Anna's fingers had memorized every detail of Samuel's face during those precious 3 weeks, the way his tiny nose wrinkled when he was hungry, how his dark eyes would find hers in the lamplight, the perfect curve of his lips when he smiled in his sleep. She'd whispered promises to him in those quiet dawn moments, that he'd grow tall and strong on this land, that he'd learn to ride horses and tend cattle, that he'd never know the hunger and uncertainty that had marked her own childhood. Now those promises were burning to ash in the howling sandstorm. "Ah, my baby." Anna's voice cracked as she clawed at Deputy Ward's iron grip, her fingernails raking bloody furrows in his thick forearms. Samuel's still inside. Through the swirling dust and smoke, she could see the orange tongues consuming everything, and the rocking chair where she'd sung lullabies, the wooden cradle carved with love, the tiny clothes she'd sewn by candlelight while dreaming of their future. But cutting through the roar of wind and flame came the sound that shattered her soul, Samuel's terrified wails growing weaker with each heartbeat. Baron Cray sat motionless on his black stallion pale eyes, reflecting the firelight like winter ice. His voice when he spoke was conversational, almost gentle, the tone of a man discussing weather, not orchestrating infanticide. "You should have signed the papers when I asked nicely, Mrs. Whitaker." He adjusted his leather gloves with deliberate care. "I gave you every opportunity to handle this reasonably." Anna's legs buckled. Only Ward's brutal grip kept her upright as she watched her dreams incinerate. In that hell, her 3-week-old son was dying, and these men, these creatures wearing badges, were savoring every second. The wind shifted, carrying the stench of burning wool and something else that made her stomach convulse. Smoke-poisoned air. The smell of her child's terror. 15 riders. Cray announced to his men, his gloved hand resting on his pearl-handled Colt. More than enough to ensure no one interferes with the tragedy. His smile was surgical in its precision. A deranged mother, overcome by childbirth madness, accidentally kills her own baby. Such a sad, common story in these territories. Anna understood with crystalline horror that this had never been about land or money. Baron Cray had planned to erase her family from existence so completely that even their memory would be poisoned with lies. 4 months earlier, Anna and Jonah Whitaker had stepped off the dusty stagecoach into Dustwater Crossing with nothing but hope and determination. The town squatted like a scab on the vast prairie, its wooden buildings already weathered gray by the relentless sun and wind that defined this harsh corner of the Dakota Territory. The land office occupied a corner of the general store, presided over by a nervous clerk named Fitzgerald, whose hands trembled as he shuffled their paperwork. 40 acres. He'd mumbled, avoiding their eyes. Good water, decent soil. Payment deferred under the Homestead Extension Act. Anna had squeezed Jonah's calloused hand as they signed the deed. At 25, she'd never owned anything more valuable than her grandmother's silver locket. Now, with their first child growing beneath her heart, they finally had a chance at the life they'd sacrificed everything to achieve. "We'll make this work." Jonah had promised, his weathered face bright with possibility as they surveyed their new home. The cabin was small but solid, with a good well and fertile bottomland. Cattle by spring, maybe horses by summer. What they couldn't know was that Fitzgerald's nervousness wasn't bureaucratic anxiety. It was the guilt of a man complicit in murder. Baron Cray had been orchestrating this moment for months, selecting families who fit his criteria, desperate newcomers with no local connections, people hungry enough to accept deals that seemed too generous. Their only friend in Dustwater Crossing was Emma Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed 16-year-old who'd survived 3 years as an orphan by learning to read the predators who circled vulnerable prey. She'd immediately sensed something wrong about how certain men watched the Whitakers. "Be careful around Baron Cray," she'd warned Anna during one of her visits to their cabin. "He owns everything that matters here, bank, newspaper, half the businesses. People who cross him tend to disappear." Anna had nodded politely, but her attention was consumed by more immediate concerns. The baby was due in October, and she wanted everything perfect. She'd spent countless hours preparing the nursery, sewing tiny clothes by lamplight, dreaming of the moment she'd hold her child for the first time. Unknown to the Whitakers, they were being watched from the ridge above their cabin. Chief Sani Wikasa of the Lakota had spent 47 years learning to read the signs of approaching trouble, and Baron Cray's expanding operations were sending clear warnings. Cray's cattle were already grazing on hunting grounds his people had used for generations. His men had been spotted surveying and marking trees on land that had never been officially claimed. Most ominously, the Baron had been asking careful questions about mineral rights and water sources, the kind of inquiries that preceded major land seizures. But there was something different about these particular settlers. They worked the land with respect rather than ravaging it. They didn't shoot at shadows or poison streams. When Anna had left food and water for Lakota scouts during the brutal winter, Sani had taken careful notice. Perhaps not all whites were cast from the same mold as Baron Cray. Samuel arrived on a bone-cold October night, with only Emma to help deliver him. Dr. Hammond had been mysteriously unavailable. His wife claimed he was treating an emergency at one of the ranches, but Emma had seen lights burning in his office all evening. It was the first thread in a web of conspiracy that was already tightening around them. Anna labored for 18 agonizing hours, her cries echoing across the empty prairie. When Samuel finally emerged, red-faced and furious at his abrupt introduction to the world, she'd wept with exhaustion and overwhelming joy. He was perfect, every finger and toe accounted for, with his father's determined chin and her dark eyes. "He's beautiful," Emma had whispered, cleaning the baby while Jonah held Anna's trembling hand. "Look at those lungs, he's going to be trouble." For 3 perfect weeks, life had seemed not just possible, but inevitable. Jonah found work with neighboring ranchers, Anna recovered her strength while reveling in motherhood, and Samuel settled into the blessed rhythm of feeding and sleeping that exhausted parents desperately needed. They were poor, but radiantly happy, unaware that their happiness was about to become a weapon forged against them. The first poisonous hint came when Mrs. Keller from the boarding house made an unexpected visit. She was a sharp-tongued woman who'd never shown the Whitakers any kindness, but she seemed genuinely troubled as she sat in their kitchen nervously clutching a cup of coffee. "Anna, dear," she'd said carefully, "people in town are talking about you. About changes since the baby came." "What kind of changes?" Anna had asked, though dread was already pooling in her stomach. "Strange behavior. Talking to yourself, neglecting your duties." Mrs. Keller's voice carried false sympathy. "I'm not saying I believe it, but Deputy Ward has been asking questions. Detailed questions." Anna had looked around her spotless kitchen at the neat stack of mended clothes, at Samuel sleeping peacefully in his handmade cradle. She'd never been more focused or capable in her entire life. "Who's spreading these lies?" Jonah had demanded. Mrs. Keller had shrugged with theatrical helplessness. "Hard to say. You know how gossip spreads in a small town. But Anna, dear, you might want to be more careful about appearances." After she'd left Anna, and Jonah had tried desperately to make sense of the accusations. Anna had been tired, certainly, but what new mother wasn't? She'd never acted strangely or endangered Samuel. The whole thing felt orchestrated, but they couldn't yet see the mechanism. The mechanism revealed itself 2 days later when Deputy Ward appeared at their door with an official document. Ward was a thick-set brute with small, mean eyes and a badge that seemed to mock the very concept of justice. "Mrs. Whitaker," he'd said with false sympathy, "I'm here about the complaints. Multiple witnesses have reported concerning behavior talking to voices nobody else can hear. Leaving the baby unattended, showing signs of what medical experts call puerperal insanity." "That's a damned lie," Anna had said flatly. "Every word of it." "No, ma'am, I'm just doing my sworn duty. I have a court order here from Judge Blackwood. Judge Blackwood. Jonah had interrupted sharply. Never heard of him. Ward's smile had been reptilian. Traveling magistrate. Specializes in mental competency cases and child welfare. Very qualified man. Very thorough in his methods. Anna's blood had turned to ice water. A convenient traveling judge. Manufactured witnesses. Fabricated evidence. The trap was closing around them with legal precision, and they were powerless to stop it. The trap snapped shut on a gray November morning when Anna was nursing Samuel by the kitchen window. The thunder of hoofbeats announced their arrival, Deputy Ward leading 8 hard-faced men, followed by a thin, pale stranger in an expensive suit, who carried himself with the arrogance of absolute authority. Behind them rode Baron Cray, himself immaculate in his black coat, despite the dust and cold, his pale eyes already calculating the final moves in his elaborate game. Jonah. Anna called, but her husband was already reaching for the rifle above the fireplace. Mrs. Anna Whitaker. Ward's voice carried theatrical authority across the yard. By order of the Territorial Court, I'm here to execute a writ of child endangerment. The minor child, Samuel Whitaker, is to be taken into protective custody, pending a competency hearing. Over my dead body, Jonah stepped onto the porch, rifle in his hands, but not yet raised. Show me proper documentation, and I want to see identification from this so-called judge. The pale stranger dismounted with fluid grace, extracting an official-looking document from his leather satchel. I am Magistrate Thaddeus Blackwood, duly appointed by territorial authority to handle cases of mental incompetence and child endangerment. This writ is legal and binding. He presented a document bearing an elaborate seal and flowing script. To Anna's untrained eye, it appeared official enough, but something about the paper felt wrong. Too fresh, too perfect, like it had been manufactured yesterday. No. Multiple witnesses have testified to your wife's dangerous behavior. Blackwood continued in a voice like winter wind. For the child's immediate safety intervention is required under territorial statute. What witnesses? Jonah demanded. I want names. Baron Cray urged his horse forward. His pale gaze fixed on Anna with predatory intensity. Mr. Whitaker, I understand your natural distress, but the law is clear. Your wife has been observed talking to invisible companions, neglecting basic maternal duties, showing classic symptoms of puerperal psychosis. We're here to prevent a tragedy. You're here to steal. Anna said, clutching Samuel protectively against her chest. This is about our land. Cray's smile was winter morning cold. Mrs. Whitaker, I'm merely a concerned citizen acting in the community's interest. Though I must observe, if you're incapable of caring for an infant, you're certainly unfit to manage a working ranch. There are responsible parties who would pay fair value for property they could use properly. The elegant cruelty of it struck Anna like a physical blow. Steal the baby, declare her insane, bankrupt them with legal fees and medical expenses until they were forced to sell. It was systematic, legal, and utterly ruthless. I won't let you touch him, Anna whispered, backing toward the cabin door. That's when Ward made his move. While Jonah was focused on the legal document, the deputy had been positioning his men in a tactical circle. Now they moved with professional efficiency, dismounting and spreading across the yard, like wolves surrounding prey. Mr. Whitaker, Judge Blackwood said calmly, I strongly advise you to surrender that weapon. Threatening officers of the Territorial Court is a capital offense. Jonah's hands tightened on the rifle, but Anna could see the terrible mathematics of their situation. He was outnumbered 8-1 by men who killed for a living. If he fought, they'd murder him, and she'd face this horror alone. Jonah, don't, she whispered desperately. Ward saw the hesitation and struck like a snake. He lunged forward while Jonah was distracted, grabbing for Samuel while Anna was focused on her husband's peril. She screamed and fought back, but Ward was stronger and more ruthless than she'd ever imagined possible. Samuel's terrified cries pierced the morning air as he was torn from his mother's arms. Anna's scream echoed across the prairie, a sound of pure maternal agony that seemed to crack the earth itself. "Give him back." Jonah started forward, but rifle barrels swung toward him like accusing fingers. "But Jonah Whitaker," Ward announced with obvious pleasure, "you're under arrest for threatening peace officers and interfering with a court order. Resisting lawful authority is a serious crime in this territory." They beat him methodically, professionally, rifle butts to the stomach and ribs, careful not to damage anything vital, but leaving him bloody and broken in the dust. Anna watched in horror as they dragged her husband away, his blood leaving a crimson trail behind them. "I'll find a way," Jonah gasped as they threw him across a horse. "Anna, I swear I'll get him back." Samuel's cries grew fainter as Ward's men rode away with him toward town. Anna stood alone in her yard, arms, empty world destroyed, watching her family disappear into the distance. Baron Cray was the last to leave, pausing his horse beside her with theatrical courtesy. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said quietly, "I want you to understand that this isn't personal. It's simply business. You possess something I require, and I have the power to acquire it." His pale eyes studied her face with clinical interest. "Sign over the deed, accept treatment for your unfortunate condition, and this situation can be resolved with minimal additional unpleasantness." "What do you really want?" Anna asked, though she suspected she already knew. Cray's smile was genuinely amused. "Progress, Mrs. Whitaker. The transformation of this wilderness into something genuinely valuable." He paused, savoring the moment. "Your land happens to sit atop the richest mineral deposits in the territory. Silver, to be precise. Enough to make whoever controls it extraordinarily wealthy." Anna's heart sank into her boots. Silver. That explained the elaborate legal machinery, the manufactured crisis, the determination to destroy them completely. Cray wasn't just stealing their home, he was stealing their future and the futures of their children's children. "I'll see you in hell first," she whispered. Cray's laugh was like wind through a graveyard. "Perhaps you will, ma'am. But first, you'll sign my papers. One way or another, you'll sign them." The Dustwater Crossing jail was a testament to the town's casual relationship with justice. A cramped, fetid box behind the sheriff's office that reeked of piss, vomit, and human despair. Jonah had been rotting there for 4 interminable days, and the walls were closing in like a coffin. His face resembled a butcher's display, purple and yellow bruises fading to sickly green around his eyes' split lips that had scabbed over a nose that would never be straight again. 3 ribs were definitely cracked, possibly broken, sending lightning through his chest with every breath. But the physical agony was nothing compared to the torture of not knowing what was happening to Anna and Samuel. "Guard," he called hoarsely, his voice raw from repetition. "I demand to see my wife." The response was always the same, cruel laughter or deliberate silence. Ward had made it crystal clear that Anna was receiving medical treatment for her condition and couldn't have visitors. The very words made Jonah's stomach churn with helpless rage. On the 4th night, fortune smiled on him. The guard was Tommy Brennan, a young man who'd always seemed decent enough around town. More importantly, he was drinking heavily from a bottle he kept poorly hidden behind his logbook. "Tommy," Jonah called softly. "Tommy, I need to talk to you." "Well, can't help you, Whitaker." Tommy slurred, but his bloodshot eyes showed guilt. "Orders are orders, and Ward's orders are specific. It's about my son." Jonah's voice cracked with emotion. "They stole my baby boy, Tommy, 3 weeks old. You got children of your own." Tommy's face crumpled. He had 2 little ones at home, and the thought of losing them was his deepest, most primal fear. "Look, I'm sorry about your situation, but I can't..." I'm not asking you to let me out. Jonah reached into his pocket and extracted his father's gold pocket watch, and the only thing of value he'd managed to keep hidden from Ward's search. I'm asking you to get one message to Emma Rodriguez. Just one. Tommy stared at the timepiece, then at Jonah's desperate, battered face. The watch was worth more than he made in half a year. What message? Tell her Anna needs help immediately. Tell her to be very careful, but Anna needs help right now. Jonah's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. And Tommy, tell her to watch for signs of silver mining. Tell her that's the key to everything. Silver mining. Tommy looked confused. Just tell her exactly that. She'll understand what it means. Tommy's hands shook as he reached for the watch. I don't know nothing about any message, he said loudly for anyone listening. And then whispered, but I might take a walk over to the general store tomorrow morning. Might need some supplies. Meanwhile, Anna was fighting her own desperate battle against both manufactured madness and the real insanity that came from helplessness and terror. They'd imprisoned her in a barren room above Dr. Hammond's office, supposedly for her own protection, while she received treatment for her dangerous condition. The room contained nothing but a narrow bed, a chamber pot, and iron bars across the single window that transformed her sanctuary into a cell. Dr. Hammond visited twice daily, bringing thin gruel and asking probing questions designed to elicit evidence of mental instability. Mrs. Whitaker, he said during his evening visit, his hands trembling as he set down the tray. You must understand that cooperation will make this process considerably easier for everyone involved. If you would simply acknowledge that you've been experiencing some difficulties since the birth. The only difficulty I'm experiencing is that you people have kidnapped my child. Anna replied, her voice steady despite the rage building like pressure in a boiler. Where is Samuel? Is he being fed properly? Is he warm? Is he crying for me? Dr. Hammond couldn't meet her eyes. The child is being cared for by qualified personnel. That's all you need to know at this time. But Anna could hear Samuel crying at night, thin, desperate wails that drifted through the building's walls from somewhere nearby. It was the sound of a baby who desperately needed his mother, and it was slowly driving her toward the genuine madness they claimed she already possessed. She'd spent countless hours testing every inch of her prison, searching for weaknesses. The bars were solid iron, but the window frame was old wood softened by years of weather. The floorboards creaked in suspicious places, suggesting gaps or rot underneath. Even the ancient lock on her door showed signs of wear that might be exploitable. Nothing she attempted worked. She was trapped helpless while her son cried for her just beyond reach. On the fourth night, she overheard a conversation that froze her blood in her veins. Dr. Hammond was talking to someone in the hallway. Judge Blackwood, she realized with growing horror. Condition is deteriorating rather than improving, Hammond was saying nervously. The delusions are becoming more frequent and more violent. She claims to hear the baby crying when he's not even in this building. Fascinating, Blackwood replied in his winter wind voice. And your professional assessment? Advanced puerperal psychosis with paranoid features. Without immediate and aggressive intervention, she could become genuinely dangerous to herself and others. What sort of intervention? Cold water treatments, physical restraints, extended isolation. In the most severe cases, there are surgical procedures that can calm the agitated mind permanently. Anna pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a scream of horror. They weren't just planning to keep her locked up, they intended to destroy her mind completely, piece by piece. And once she was declared permanently insane, they could do anything they wanted with Samuel. She had to escape. But how could one woman fight an entire town that had turned against her? The answer came the next morning, when a small piece of paper slipped under her door. Anna snatched it up with desperate hope. The message was brief, written in a shaky hand. Got Tommy's message. I know about the silver now. Will help. Stay strong. Trust me, E. Emma had received Jonah's message and understood its significance. More importantly, she was willing to risk everything to help them. Anna wasn't completely alone after all. But even as hope flickered in her chest, she could hear heavy footsteps approaching in the hallway. Multiple sets of boots moving with grim purpose. They were coming for her again, and this time, she suspected they weren't just bringing soup and questions. She hid Emma's note in her shoe and prepared to fight for her sanity, her freedom, and her son's life. Because if she couldn't escape soon, there might not be enough of Anna Whitaker left to save anyone. Emma Rodriguez had perfected the art of invisibility during her years as an orphan, but now that hard-won skill was her most potent weapon. She moved through Dustwater Crossing like smoke gathering intelligence and building an unlikely network of allies. Her first breakthrough came from Mrs. Keller, the boarding house owner, who delivered the initial warnings to Anna. The woman cornered Emma behind the general store, her sharp eyes blazing with righteous anger. "That girl isn't crazy," Mrs. Keller declared without preamble. "I've seen genuine madness, and Anna Whitaker doesn't have it. Someone's been spreading deliberate lies about her, and I have a damn good idea who." Emma's pulse quickened. What kind of lies exactly? Stories about her talking to herself, neglecting the baby, acting erratically. But here's what's interesting. Half the people repeating these stories never actually witnessed any of this supposed behavior. They're just parroting what they heard from Ward or his associates. "Would you be willing to testify to that?" Mrs. Keller's face went pale. "Child, I have a business to run and debts to pay. Baron Cray could destroy me with a single word to the bank." She paused, then pressed a small brass key into Emma's palm. "But I might accidentally forget to lock the rear entrance to the medical building tonight, around midnight." Emma stared at the key. "Why are you taking this risk?" "Because I had a baby once. Lost him to fever when he was exactly Samuel's age." Mrs. Keller's voice cracked with old grief. No mother should endure what Anna's going through, especially when it's all built on fabricated lies. That night, Emma used the key to slip into the medical building through the back door. The place was dark and silent, but she could hear faint sounds from upstairs, Samuel's weak crying and Anna's desperate whispers of comfort. They were keeping mother and child close enough to torture each other psychologically, but far enough apart to maintain the fiction of Anna's dangerous madness. Emma crept up the creaking stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. Anna's door was locked, but Mrs. Keller's key worked here as well. She eased the door open and found Anna sitting by the barred window, staring out at the night with hollow eyes. "Mrs. Whitaker," Emma whispered urgently. Anna spun around, her eyes wide with desperate hope and fear. "Emma, is Samuel alive? Please tell me he's alive." "He's alive but weak from crying and hunger. They're keeping him in the room directly next to yours." Emma pressed a bundle of bread and dried meat through the door. "I can hear him at night. He needs you desperately." Anna's hands shook as she accepted the food. "They're planning to destroy my mind completely, Emma. I overheard them discussing surgical procedures, treatments that would make me permanently insane. I understand about the silver now," Emma said quietly. "Jonah managed to get word to me through Tommy Brennan." "What did he mean exactly?" Anna's eyes widened with surprise and understanding. "Baron Cray told me himself. Our land sits directly over rich silver deposits. That's what this elaborate conspiracy is really about, not just our 40 acres, but the fortune buried beneath it." Emma's mind raced with the implications. Silver explained everything: the sophisticated legal framework, the manufactured crisis, the determination to completely annihilate the Whitaker family, rather than simply driving them away. With that kind of wealth at stake, Cray would murder anyone who stood between him and the deposits. "I've been gathering evidence systematically," Emma continued. "Forged documents, false witness statements, proof of the entire conspiracy. But I need more time to build an airtight case. Time is exactly what we don't have, Anna replied grimly. They're moving to the final phase of their plan. I can feel it approaching like a storm. Before Emma could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway below, someone moving quietly but purposefully up the stairs. Emma pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath and praying she wouldn't be discovered. Mrs. Whitaker. Dr. Hammond's voice was soft but urgent. I need to speak with you immediately. Anna looked at Emma with confusion. Why would Hammond visit her in the middle of the night? The door opened carefully, and Hammond slipped inside, carrying his medical bag and wearing an expression of profound guilt and fear. His face was haggard, marked by sleepless nights and moral torment. Dr. Anna said cautiously, I can't continue with this charade. Hammond whispered desperately. What they're demanding I do to you, it isn't medicine. It's deliberate torture designed to drive you genuinely insane. He opened his bag and extracted a small brown bottle. Laudanum, enough to keep you unconscious for many hours. Tomorrow morning they intend to perform a procedure that will damage your mind permanently. Anna's blood turned to ice. What kind of procedure? They want me to report that you attempted self-harm and required emergency surgical intervention. But the surgery would be real, and the damage would be irreversible. Hammond's hands trembled as he set the bottle on the small table. I've been a coward, Mrs. Whitaker. I've allowed them to use me as an instrument of torture against innocent people. But I cannot and will not cross this final line. Emma stepped out of the shadows. Dr. Hammond, we need your complete cooperation to stop this conspiracy permanently. Hammond jumped, startled by her presence. Miss Rodriguez, what are you doing here? Gathering evidence to destroy Baron Cray's operation completely. Emma pulled out a bundle of papers from inside her coat. I have forged documents, fabricated witness statements, proof of the entire conspiracy reaching back months. But I need someone with medical authority and community standing to corroborate the evidence. They'll kill me, Hammond whispered. If I testify against them publicly, they'll murder me. They're planning to kill Anna anyway, Emma said bluntly. And once they have the silver, they won't need your cooperation anymore. You're already a dead man, Doctor. The only question is whether you die as a coward who enabled evil, or as a hero who fought against it. Hammond stared at the papers in Emma's hands, then at Anna's desperate, haunted face. For a long moment, Emma thought he might refuse and doom them all. Then his shoulders straightened with something approaching genuine courage. What exactly do you need me to do? Help us retrieve Samuel and expose the truth before it's too late, Anna said firmly. Hammond nodded slowly, his decision made. There's a way to accomplish both objectives, but it's extremely dangerous and we'll have to move tonight. Right now. As they huddled together in the dark room, making desperate plans that could save or damn them all, none of them noticed the shadow that had been listening intently at the door. Deputy Ward had grown suspicious of Hammond's recent behavior, and his instincts had proved devastatingly correct. The doctor's betrayal changed everything. They'd have to accelerate their timeline dramatically, eliminate all witnesses permanently, and tie up every loose end before the conspiracy could be exposed to outside authorities. Ward smiled grimly as he crept back down the stairs to report this development to Baron Cray immediately. The endgame was beginning, and this time there would be no survivors to tell inconvenient truths. The sandstorm struck Dustwater Crossing like biblical wrath, transforming the world into a whirling hell of dust and fury. In the chaos, Baron Cray saw his perfect opportunity to eliminate every loose end permanently. Emma was fighting her way through the storm toward the medical building when riders materialized from the dust like demons. Deputy Ward's voice cut through the howling wind with cruel triumph. Well, well, little Emma Rodriguez wandering around in weather like this. Almost like she's conducting some kind of business. Emma's heart stopped. Clutched against her chest were the documents that could destroy Cray's entire empire. Forged papers, witness statements, undeniable proof of the conspiracy. If they captured her now, just trying to reach shelter, she said, pressing the papers tighter against her body. Interesting thing. Ward continued, dismounting and blocking her path with predatory confidence. We've been hearing rumors about a young woman gathering evidence, passing secret messages, organizing some kind of resistance. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Before Emma could respond, brutal hands seized her from behind. The precious documents scattered in the wind, months of careful investigation, disappearing into the storm like autumn leaves. Emma fought with desperate fury, but her attackers were too strong and too experienced. The boss has been wanting a private conversation with you, Ward said with a cold smile as they bound her hands. About your friends and their unfortunate circumstances. As they dragged her away, Emma caught a glimpse of orange flames flickering through the storm. Fire. Her heart sank as she realized the horrible scope of what was happening. Cray wasn't just eliminating witnesses. He was staging a massive tragedy that would explain away every loose end simultaneously. In the medical building, Anna heard the commotion outside and pressed her face against the barred window. Through the swirling dust, she could see the distant glow of flames, and understanding hit her like a physical blow. They're burning something, she whispered to Dr. Hammond, who was preparing to help her escape. Creating evidence of an accident. Hammond's face went ashen. Where's the baby right now? I don't know. They moved him yesterday evening. I haven't heard him crying since. Anna's voice broke off as the horrifying truth crystallized. Dear God, they're going to claim Samuel died in a fire, that I was so insane I killed my own child through negligence. We have to leave immediately, Hammond said urgently. Before the door exploded inward and Ward strode in with 4 of his men. His face was grim with satisfaction, and Emma was slung over his shoulder like a sack of grain, her hands bound and a gag in her mouth. Going somewhere, Doc Ward asked pleasantly. And Mrs. Whitaker, you're looking remarkably lucid for someone who's supposedly completely insane. Hammond stepped protectively in front of Anna. Ward, you can't do this to an innocent woman. She's a dangerous lunatic who's about to have a tragic accident. Ward corrected with clinical precision. Just like her husband, who's going to attempt escaping from jail during the storm and get himself shot while resisting arrest. Just like her baby, who's going to perish in that cabin fire because his deranged mother abandoned him to the flames. Anna's scream of rage and anguish echoed through the building like a banshee's wail. You monsters, where is my son? Ward's smile was genuinely amused by her despair. Safe for the moment. But that situation is about to change dramatically. His expression turned serious. See, we have a significant problem. Too many people know too much about our operations. Time to clean house permanently. That's when Emma managed to work the gag from her mouth and gasp out words that changed everything. The silver isn't under their land. Ward's smile faltered. What did you say? The silver deposits. Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with desperate courage. I found the real geological survey, the one Baron Cray's been hiding from everyone. The silver isn't under the Whitaker property at all. It's under the old Lakota burial ground 3 miles north of town. The room went dead silent. Ward stared at Emma with growing horror, and even his hardened men looked deeply uncomfortable. Desecrating Native American burial grounds wasn't just morally reprehensible. It was a guaranteed way to start a territorial war that would bring federal cavalry down on everyone's heads. You're lying, Ward said, but his voice lacked conviction. The survey documents are in Cray's personal safe. Emma pressed on relentlessly. along with his correspondence with Eastern mining companies and territorial officials. He's been planning this desecration for over a year, using the Whitakers as a convenient distraction while he prepared to rob the dead. Anna saw the truth reflected in Ward's eyes. This conspiracy wasn't just about their modest homestead anymore. This was about a scheme so vast and blasphemous that its exposure would destroy everyone involved and quite possibly trigger a regional conflict. My God, Dr. Hammond whispered in horror. How many people is he planning to murder to cover this up? As many as necessary, Ward said grimly, but Emma could see doubt creeping into his expression. Starting with you three troublemakers. But even as he spoke, Ward's men were exchanging uncertain glances. They'd signed up to intimidate settlers and forge documents not to massacre innocents and desecrate sacred burial grounds. The job was spiraling completely out of control. Ward, one of them said carefully, maybe we should discuss this situation with Mr. Cray before we do anything permanent. The boss already knows everything. Ward snapped, but sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cold. He's been planning this desecration all along. Now shut up and help me secure these prisoners. That's when they heard it, the sound that every white man in the territory had learned to fear. War cries in the distance, growing closer with each heartbeat. The Lakota were coming, and they were coming in force. How is that possible? Ward whispered, his face draining of color. Emma managed a bloody smile through her split lip. I told you I've been gathering evidence systematically. That included sending detailed information to Chief Sani about Cray's real plans, about the burial ground desecration. Through the storm, the war cries multiplied and grew louder. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, united in righteous fury. The Lakota had learned about Cray's intention to rob their ancestors' graves, and they were coming to stop it with overwhelming force. Ward's men were already backing toward the door, their faces tight with terror. Fighting desperate homesteaders was one thing, but facing Lakota warriors defending their most sacred ground was suicide. Hold your positions, Ward shouted, but his voice cracked with panic. We can handle a few savages. A few. Emma laughed harshly. You think Chief Sani came alone. You think he didn't call in every alliance, every blood debt, every warrior who's been waiting for the perfect excuse to strike back. You've handed them justification for total war, Ward. And you're going to be the first to pay the price. The deputy's face went white as he realized the magnitude of what they'd unleashed. This wasn't about the Whitaker family anymore. It was about a conflict that could engulf the entire territory in blood and flames. And in the chaos that was about to consume Dustwater Crossing, anything could happen. The Lakota war party erupted from the storm like vengeful spirits, their painted faces demonic in the swirling dust. Chief Sani rode at their head, his weathered features set in lines of implacable fury. Behind him came 60 warriors, all armed with rifles taken from cavalry raids and burning with righteous anger. But they weren't alone. As the dust settled, Ward could see other figures emerging from the storm, white townspeople led by Mrs. Keller and Pete from the livery stable. The entire community was rising against Baron Cray's tyranny. Jesus Christ, one of Ward's men whispered. We're outnumbered 15-1. Ward's face was a mask of desperate rage. Numbers don't matter. We control the building, we have hostages. They can't touch us without risking innocent lives. But even as he spoke, his men were deserting. They'd been paid to intimidate and steal, not to fight a war against impossible odds. One by one, they slipped away into the storm, leaving Ward alone with his prisoners and his rapidly crumbling schemes. It's finished, Ward, Dr. Hammond said quietly. Surrender now, and you might live to stand trial. Shut up, Ward backhanded the doctor, sending him sprawling across the floor. Nothing's finished until I say it's finished. Anna watched the deputy's growing desperation with calculating eyes. He was cornered, outnumbered, and running out of options. That made him infinitely more dangerous, a wounded animal with nothing left to lose. "Where's my son?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos outside. Ward's laugh was high and brittle with hysteria. "Your precious baby, he's in the old mine shaft 2 miles north of here. Been there since yesterday, crying his little heart out. By now in this cold." He shrugged with cruel indifference. Anna's world exploded into red rage. She lunged at Ward with her bare hands, her fingernails raking across his face before he could react. They crashed to the floor together, Ward cursing as he tried to pin her down while blood streamed from the gouges on his cheek. "You monster," Anna screamed, clawing at his eyes. "He's just a baby." Emma seized the moment of chaos to break free from her hastily tied bonds. The ropes were loose, and Ward's distraction gave her the opening she desperately needed. She grabbed the heavy ceramic water pitcher from the washstand and brought it down on Ward's skull with all her strength. The deputy collapsed, blood streaming from his scalp. Anna rolled away from his unconscious form, her chest heaving with exhaustion and fury. "The mine shaft." She gasped to Dr. Hammond, who was struggling to his feet while holding his bruised jaw. "We have to reach Samuel immediately." "Anna, that's 2 miles through the worst storm in years," Hammond protested. "The visibility is 0, and those old mining shafts are death traps even in perfect weather. I don't care if it's 20 miles through hell itself." Anna was already moving toward the window, studying the iron bars that had kept her prisoner. "He's been alone for over a day. If he's still alive." Emma joined her at the window, understanding immediately. "Mrs. Whitaker, we'll need help. Horses, supplies, people who know the terrain intimately. On the Lakota," Anna said with sudden clarity. "Chief Sawney knows every inch of this land. If anyone can find that mine shaft in this storm, it's him and his warriors." Through the chaos outside, they could hear the sounds of battle as Cray's remaining men made their desperate last stand against the combined forces of townspeople and Lakota warriors. But there was no time to wait for the fighting to end. Every minute that passed reduced Samuel's chances of survival. Anna grabbed Ward's unconscious form and began dragging him toward the window. "Help me loosen these bars. We're getting out of here right now." "How?" Emma asked, but she was already helping Anna examine the window frame with new eyes. "The same way I've been trying for days," Anna replied grimly. "With desperation, determination, and now—" She hefted Ward's heavy pistol. "With proper tools." Meanwhile, 2 miles away through the howling storm, Jonah was fighting his own desperate battle for survival and salvation. Tommy Brennan had kept his word, appearing at the jail with keys and a fabricated story about Ward ordering a prisoner transfer to the old mine for security reasons. The journey through the storm had been a nightmare of dust, confusion, and near-death experiences. But they'd finally reached the abandoned silver mine that had originally drawn Baron Cray to this godforsaken territory. The irony wasn't lost on Jonah. His son was imprisoned in the very hole in the ground that had caused all their suffering. "Down there," Tommy said, pointing to a wooden platform suspended over the mine shaft by a system of ropes and pulleys. "I heard crying when I came to check the site earlier today." Jonah peered into the darkness below, his heart clenching with paternal desperation. The shaft dropped straight down for 30 feet before opening into a wider, natural chamber. It was a perfect prison escape, was impossible without help from above. And the sound of a baby's cries would be completely muffled by the solid rock walls. "Samuel," Jonah called into the depths with all his strength. "Samuel, Daddy's here." The response was immediate, but heartbreaking. Weak, exhausted cries that spoke of hunger, thirst, and abandonment. Jonah's heart nearly broke as he realized how close he'd come to losing his son forever. "Help me with this platform," he told Tommy urgently. "We need to get down there immediately." But Tommy was staring back toward town, his face pale with terror. "Jonah, we've got serious company approaching. Baron Cray emerged from the storm like a specter of death, flanked by his last remaining loyal men. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his expensive coat torn, and his aristocratic face streaked with dust and sweat. But his pale eyes still burned with undiminished fury and determination. "Mr. Whitaker." Cray called out, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "How remarkably persistent of you to make it this far through such adverse conditions." Jonah turned slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward the pistol Tommy had given him. "Let my son go, Cray. This is between you and me now." "Is it?" Cray's laugh was bitter as winter wind through dead branches. "I disagree fundamentally. You see, your family has cost me absolutely everything. My carefully constructed plans, my political connections, my entire business empire, all of it crumbling because you wouldn't simply die quietly when I asked politely. The silver was never under our land." Jonah said, understanding flooding through him like ice water. "Emma found the real geological survey, didn't she? The deposits are under the Lakota burial ground." Cray's face twisted with frustrated rage. "Clever girl. Far too clever for her own good, as it turns out. Yes, the silver lies beneath sacred ground. Do you have any conception of how much wealth is buried down there? Enough to buy senators, governors, entire territorial legislatures. And you were willing to start a war to get it." "War was inevitable," Cray replied with cold logic. "The Indians are a dying race, regardless of our actions. I simply wanted to profit from their extinction rather than allowing the government to waste such valuable resources." Tommy Brennan, who had been listening in growing horror, finally found his voice. "Mr. Cray, I can't be part of this anymore. Desecrating graves, endangering children, this isn't what I agreed to do." Cray's pearl-handled pistol appeared in his hand with practiced speed. "Then perhaps it's time for you to join them in their graves, Mr. Brennan." The gunshot echoed across the desert, but it wasn't Cray who fired first. Tommy's rifle spoke with authority, the bullet taking the Baron in the shoulder and spinning him around like a child's top. Cray's own shot went wide, his pistol flying into the darkness of the mine shaft. "Hey, Jonah, get the baby!" Tommy shouted, working the lever of his rifle with desperate efficiency. "I'll hold them off as long as possible." But Cray's men were already returning fire, their muzzle flashes lighting the storm like deadly lightning. Tommy cried out as a bullet caught him in the leg, sending him sprawling behind the mine's wooden framework. Jonah didn't hesitate for a heartbeat. He grabbed the rope attached to the platform and began lowering himself into the mine shaft, ignoring the bullets whining overhead like angry wasps. Every instinct screamed at him to find cover, but his son was down there, helpless and terrified. The descent seemed to take forever, the platform swaying wildly in the wind that howled down the shaft like the breath of hell itself. Finally, Jonah's boots touched solid ground, and he found himself in a natural cavern lit only by the dim light filtering from above. "Samuel," he called desperately. "Where are you, son?" The crying was stronger now, coming from a rough wooden crate in the corner of the cavern. Jonah rushed to it and found his son wrapped in dirty blankets, his tiny face red with exhaustion and hunger. But he was alive, weak and dehydrated, but miraculously alive. "It's okay, baby," Jonah whispered, lifting Samuel from the makeshift prison. "Daddy's here. Daddy's got you now." Above them, the gunfight continued to rage with increasing intensity. Jonah could hear Tommy's rifle answering the steady fire from Cray's men, but the odds were heavily against the young deputy. Soon they'd overwhelm his position and come down into the mine to finish what they'd started. Jonah looked around the cavern, desperately searching for another exit. The walls were solid rock carved by nature and mining equipment into smooth surfaces that offered no handholds whatsoever. The only way out was the shaft above, now controlled by his enemies. He was trapped, holding his dying son in what might become their tomb. That's when he heard new sounds from above. War cries and gunfire, the thunder of horses and the clash of weapons. The battle for Dustwater Crossing had reached the mine, and reinforcements were finally arriving. "Hold on, Samuel," Jonah whispered, clutching his son against his chest. "Help is coming. Your mama's coming." But even as he spoke, he could hear Baron Cray's voice, high and desperate with pain and rage. "If I can't have the silver, then no one can bring me the dynamite immediately." Jonah's blood turned to ice in his veins. Cray was planning to collapse the mine entirely, burying the evidence and the witnesses together in tons of rock and earth. In minutes, maybe less, an explosion would bring down the entire shaft, sealing them in this cavern forever. Above them, the fuse was already being lit. The dynamite's fuse sputtered and sparked as it burned steadily toward destruction, each second bringing Jonah and Samuel closer to death. Above, the battle had reached fever pitch. Chief Sani's warriors had arrived just as Baron Cray was preparing to destroy all evidence of his crimes forever. Anna burst from the medical building as the mine erupted in gunfire, her clothes torn and her hands bloody from clawing through window bars and iron restraints. Emma and Dr. Hammond flanked her, all three racing through the storm toward the distant sounds of battle and the flickering orange glow that marked their destination. "Lead the mine," Anna screamed over the howling wind. "They're at the old mine shaft." Chief Sani appeared through the dust astride his painted war horse, his weathered face grim with lethal purpose. Behind him rode a dozen of his finest warriors, their faces painted for war, their weapons ready for vengeance. "Mrs. Whitaker," Sani called out. "Your husband and child, in the mine shaft." Anna pointed toward the flickering lights ahead. "Cray's trying to kill them with explosives." Without hesitation, Sani wheeled his horse and galloped toward the mine, his war cry echoing across the desert like a promise of retribution. Anna ran after him, her damaged ankle sending lightning through her leg with every step, but nothing in heaven or hell could stop her now. At the mine, Tommy Brennan was making his desperate last stand behind an overturned ore cart, his rifle empty and his leg streaming blood. Baron Cray crouched near the mine shaft, cradling his wounded shoulder, while one of his remaining men held a burning torch dangerously close to the dynamite fuse. "Light it!" Cray screamed over the gunfire, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Bring the whole damn thing down." "Boss, there's innocent people down there," the man protested weakly. "A baby? There are no innocent people in this territory." Cray's voice rose to a shriek. "Only obstacles to progress and profit. Light the fuse right now." The man reluctantly touched his torch to the fuse, then scrambled away as it began to burn steadily toward the bundle of dynamite planted among the mine's wooden support beams. In less than 90 seconds, the explosion would collapse the entire shaft. That's when Chief Sani struck with the fury of avenging justice. The Lakota war party hit Cray's position like an avalanche of righteousness, their horses materializing from the storm with supernatural silence. Arrows flew through the dust with deadly precision, and 3 of Cray's men dropped without firing a shot. The others broke and ran into the storm, abandoning their leader to face the consequences of his greed and blasphemy. Sani leapt from his horse and sprinted toward the burning fuse, but Cray intercepted him with a knife drawn from his boot. The 2 men crashed together, rolling in the dust and fighting for control of the blade. "You savage!" Cray snarled, slashing wildly at Sani's face. "You're all just obstacles to civilization." Sani caught Cray's wrist and twisted ruthlessly, sending the knife spinning away into the darkness. "Your civilization brings only death and desecration," he replied quietly, then struck Cray in the throat with the edge of his hand. The Baron collapsed, gasping and clutching his neck, but the fuse continued to burn steadily. Sani lunged for it desperately, but his fingers closed on empty air and the flame had already disappeared into the wooden casing around the dynamite bundle. "Jonah!" Anna's scream cut through the chaos as she reached the mine shaft. The fuse is burning 30 seconds. 20 feet below in the cavern, Jonah heard the desperation in his wife's voice and looked up to see her silhouette against the stormy sky. Samuel was weakening in his arms, his cries growing fainter with each passing moment, but he was still alive. "Anna," he called back with all his strength. "We're here, we're both here. At the dynamite." Anna pointed frantically to the support beam where the explosive was planted. 20 seconds. Jonah's mind raced through impossible calculations. The platform was 20 feet above him, swaying wildly in the wind. Even if he could reach it, there wasn't time to climb out before the explosion. But maybe, just maybe. Anna listened carefully. He shouted desperately, "When I say jump, you jump away from the shaft as far as you can. I'm not leaving you. Though you have to for Samuel or our future." Anna looked around frantically, her eyes falling on the rope and pulley system that controlled the wooden platform. If she could swing it toward the mine opening at the exact moment of explosion, maybe the blast would propel it upward instead of collapsing everything inward. It was insane, impossible, but it was their only chance for survival. McAnna grabbed the younger woman's arm desperately. "Help me with this rope pull with everything you have." Emma saw what Anna was planning and nodded grimly. Together, they began hauling on the rope, with desperate strength swinging the wooden platform toward the center of the mine shaft. If their timing was perfect, if the angle was exactly right, if they were incredibly lucky. Now Jonah, Anna screamed with everything she had. "Get on the platform right now." 20 feet below, Jonah leapt for the swaying platform with Samuel clutched protectively against his chest. His fingers caught the edge just as the dynamite exploded with earth-shaking force. The world erupted in fire thunder and flying debris. The blast wave shot up through the mine shaft like a cannon carrying rocks, dust, smoke, and a wooden platform with 2 precious lives clinging desperately to it. Jonah felt himself hurled skyward with tremendous force, his ears ringing and his lungs burning from the superheated air. But in the chaos of the explosion, something went wrong. The platform's ropes snapped under the tremendous strain, and Jonah found himself falling through space with Samuel in his arms. They were going to hit the ground with lethal force. There was no way to survive the impact. That's when Chief Sani made a decision that would haunt him forever. The Lakota chief had 2 choices in that split-second dive toward Anna, who was dangerously close to the collapsing mine entrance, or try to break Jonah and Samuel's fall. He couldn't save both, and he had perhaps a heartbeat to decide. Sani threw himself toward the falling father and son, his body breaking their impact with the rocky ground. The collision was devastating. Sani's ribs cracked audibly, and blood erupted from his mouth as they crashed together in a tangle of limbs. But Jonah and Samuel survived the fall. Behind them, the mine entrance collapsed completely in a thunderous cascade of rocks and timber. Anna screamed as she realized how close they'd all come to being buried alive, then ran toward the wreckage where her family lay, motionless. Jonah, Samuel. She fell to her knees beside them, her hands shaking as she checked for signs of life. Jonah stirred first, groaning, as he tried to sit up while still protecting Samuel. "Anna, you're alive," she sobbed, wrapping her arms around both of them. "You're both alive." Samuel's angry, healthy cry cut through the settling dust like a benediction. The baby was dehydrated and exhausted, but miraculously uninjured by his ordeal. Chief Sani lay nearby, conscious but clearly in pain. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, and his breathing was labored. Emma and Dr. Hammond rushed to his side, Hammond immediately beginning to examine his injuries. Broken ribs. Hammond diagnosed quickly. Possibly internal bleeding. We need to get him medical attention immediately. "Will he live?" Anna asked, looking at the man who had sacrificed his body to save her family. "If we act quickly, yes." But it was a close thing. Around them, the storm was finally beginning to subside. The other townspeople were emerging from cover, and the remaining Lakota warriors were securing the area. Baron Cray lay unconscious near the collapsed mine, his neck twisted but still breathing. The nightmare was over, but the cost had been higher than any of them had imagined. The aftermath of the mine explosion revealed the true scope of Baron Cray's conspiracy, like the receding tide exposing shipwrecks. In his destroyed office, territorial investigators found detailed maps of silver deposits correspondence with Eastern mining companies and evidence of similar schemes operating in 4 other territories. Judge Morrison arrived from the territorial capital with a full federal investigation team, including marshals and representatives from the Department of Indian Affairs. The scandal, when it broke in newspapers from Denver to Washington, would trigger congressional hearings and major reforms in how territories were governed. Mrs. Whitaker, Judge Morrison said as he interviewed Anna in the hastily established courthouse, "I want you to understand that what happened to your family will result in fundamental changes to territorial law. We're implementing new safeguards to prevent this kind of abuse from ever happening again." Anna nodded, but her attention was focused on Samuel, who was nursing hungrily after his ordeal. Dr. Hammond had examined the baby thoroughly and declared him weak but fundamentally healthy. A few days of proper care and nourishment would restore him completely. "What happens to Cray and his accomplices?" she asked. "Baron Cray will stand trial for conspiracy, fraud, kidnapping, and attempted murder. If convicted, he faces life in federal prison or hanging." Morrison paused grimly. "Deputy Ward has already confessed in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony will ensure convictions for everyone involved." Anna felt no satisfaction at the prospect of Cray's execution. The man had caused tremendous suffering, but his death wouldn't undo the trauma or restore the innocence her family had lost. Chief Sani was recovering slowly from his injuries in Dr. Hammond's clinic. The Lakota chief had suffered 3 broken ribs and a collapsed lung, but Hammond's quick treatment had saved his life. The sight of the white doctor working desperately to save the Indian chief had become a powerful symbol of the changes sweeping through Dustwater Crossing. "He saved our lives," Anna told Sani during one of her visits to his bedside. "How can we ever repay that debt?" Sani's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "There is no debt between people who choose to do what is right. You showed kindness to my people when you could have shown fear. I returned that kindness when it was needed most." Over the following weeks, Dustwater Crossing began to transform from a town ruled by fear into something unprecedented in the territory. The revelation of Cray's conspiracy had shocked the community into confronting its own complicity in the injustice visited upon the Whitakers. Mrs. Keller organized a relief fund for the family, with donations pouring in from across the territory. Pete from the livery stable donated lumber and labor for rebuilding. Even former supporters of Baron Cray stepped forward to make amends, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. "It's guilt money," Emma observed as she helped Anna sort through the contributions. "Maybe," Anna replied, watching Samuel sleep peacefully in his new cradle. "But guilt can lead to conscience, and conscience can lead to justice. We have to start somewhere." Tommy Brennan, recovering from his leg wound but determined to atone for his initial involvement in the conspiracy, was appointed as the new territorial marshal for the region. His first official act was to establish new protocols for investigating claims of mental incompetence, ensuring that no family could be victimized the way the Whitakers had been. "I got to live with what I did," he told Anna as they worked together to plan improvements for the town. "The best I can do now is make sure it never happens to anyone else." Dr. Hammond, facing a reduced sentence for his cooperation with authorities, threw himself into establishing a medical clinic that would serve both white settlers and Lakota families. His guilt over his role in the conspiracy had transformed him into one of the most dedicated healers in the territory. "Sometimes healing others is the only way to heal yourself," he told Anna during one of Samuel's checkups. As autumn turned to winter, Anna found herself becoming something she'd never expected: a leader in the community. People sought her advice on everything from land disputes to family matters, recognizing in her the strength that had carried her through unimaginable trials. The most significant change was in Anna herself. The scars on her palms had faded to thin white lines, permanent reminders of the night she'd fought iron and flame to save her son. But they no longer seemed like marks of suffering. They had become symbols of what a mother's love could accomplish when tested by the ultimate trial. "What do you think Samuel will remember of all this?" Jonah asked one evening as they sat together on the porch of their rebuilt cabin. Anna looked down at her son, now thriving under her care, his eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. "Not the details," she said softly. "But he'll remember the feeling. Safety, love, the knowledge that people will fight for what's right even when it seems impossible." The new cabin was smaller than their original home, but it felt larger, somehow expanded by the community support that had made it possible. Chief Sani, despite his injuries, had contributed traditional Lakota blessing ceremonies to sanctify the new structure, creating a bridge between cultures that had seemed impossible just months before. As winter deepened, word came that the federal government was establishing a new program for territorial development, using dust-water crossing as a model for peaceful coexistence between settlers and Native Americans. The transformation that had begun with one family's desperate fight for survival was spreading across the region. "We've proven that change is possible," Emma said during one of their evening conversations. "That people can choose justice over convenience, courage over comfort." Anna nodded, watching the sun set over land that had been purchased with suffering but secured with community. The nightmare that had begun with Baron Cray's greed had been transformed into something approaching hope. 6 months after the mine explosion, Anna stood in the doorway of their rebuilt home, watching Samuel take his first tentative steps across the wooden floor. Her son, now walking at 11 months, toddled between his father's outstretched arms and the gentle hands of White Dove Chief Sani's granddaughter, who had become an unofficial member of their extended family. "Strong boy," White Dove said in her careful English, steadying Samuel as he swayed on unsteady legs. "We'll build bridges between our peoples." Anna smiled, her heart full, as she watched her son grow up in a world transformed by their struggle. The community center that had been built with donations from across the territory was bustling with activity, children from both cultures learning together, adults sharing skills and knowledge, families building the foundation of lasting peace. "Mrs. Whitaker." Emma approached from the kitchen carrying an official-looking letter. "This came with the supply wagon. It's from Washington." Anna accepted the envelope with some apprehension. Federal correspondence still made her nervous, a legacy of the legal nightmare Baron Cray had created. But as she read the contents, her eyes widened with amazement. "What is it?" Jonah asked, looking up from the wooden toy he was carving for Samuel. "It's from the Secretary of the Interior." Anna said, her voice filled with wonder. "They're documenting our community as a model for territorial development. They want to send officials here to study how we've achieved peace between settlers and Native Americans." Emma's face lit up with excitement. "That's wonderful national recognition for what we've built here." "There's more." Anna continued reading further. "They're offering federal support for our school system and medical clinic. And they're granting us protected status to ensure that what happened to us can never happen to anyone else in this territory." Chief Sani entered the house as Anna finished reading, his movements still careful due to his healing ribs. His weathered face showed approval as he listened to the news. "Recognition from the Great Father in Washington," he said thoughtfully. "Words on paper have power only when backed by deeds. But your deeds speak louder than their words." As if to prove his point, Samuel chose that moment to toddle toward the chief, his arms outstretched and his face bright with delight. Sani caught the boy, gently lifting him high enough to see out the window at the bustling community beyond. "You look, little bridge builder," Sani said softly. "See what your family's courage has created." Anna joined them at the window, following their gaze across the valley. The sight never failed to move her. Families from different cultures working together, children playing without regard for the color of their skin or the language they spoke at home. A community that had chosen healing over hatred. Is it everything you hoped for? Emma asked, moving to stand beside them. Anna considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, her world had been consumed by terror and desperation. She had fought through fire and storm, faced down armed men and corrupt officials, all for the simple right to hold her child and live in peace. It's more than I ever dared hope for, she said quietly. We've proven that people can change, that communities can heal from even the deepest wounds. And we've shown that justice isn't just an ideal, it can be a living reality when ordinary people refuse to accept that wrong is inevitable. As the day faded into evening, the community center filled with families gathering for shared meals and conversation. Tommy Brennan arrived with the evening dispatch, his limp now barely noticeable. His transformation from reluctant conspirator to dedicated lawman had become a symbol of the community's capacity for redemption. Any word from the territorial capital? Anna asked as he sorted through the letters. Good news mostly, Tommy replied. The last of Cray's co-conspirators was sentenced yesterday. 25 years in federal prison. And there's talk of establishing similar community centers throughout the territory. Dr. Hammond emerged from the clinic, his face showing the satisfaction of a man who had found his true calling. His reduced sentence included mandatory community service, which he had embraced as an opportunity for redemption rather than punishment. How's Mrs. Patterson's daughter? Anna asked. The woman had ridden 40 miles to bring her sick child to the only medical facility in the region that treated everyone equally. Much better, Hammond replied. The fever broke this afternoon, and she should be ready to travel home tomorrow. He paused, looking around at the thriving community. 6 months ago I thought my life was over. Now I understand it was just beginning. As night fell over Dustwater Crossing, Anna found herself standing on the porch with Samuel drowsing in her arms. The stars were brilliant in the clear desert sky, and the sounds of community life drifted peacefully through the evening air. Any regrets? Jonah asked, joining her in the starlight. Anna looked down at her hands, still marked by thin white scars from the night she had clawed through iron bars to save her son. Those scars were permanent reminders of the darkest moment of her life, but also of the strength she had discovered when everything seemed lost. None, she said firmly. Every scar, every tear, every moment of terror, it all led us here. To this place, this community, this life we've built together. Our suffering wasn't meaningless if it taught us the true value of justice and the power of people working together. From inside the community center came the sound of laughter as Emma told stories to a group of children, her voice weaving tales of courage and kindness in both English and the Lakota words she had been learning. Chief Sani sat nearby, adding his own embellishments to ensure that the lessons of both peoples were preserved and passed on. What do you think Samuel will make of all this when he's older? Anna asked, adjusting her sleeping son in her arms. He'll understand that change is possible, Jonah replied confidently. That justice isn't just something you hope for, it's something you build day by day, choice by choice. And he'll know that even in the darkest moments, there are always people willing to stand up for what's right. Anna nodded, pressing a gentle kiss to Samuel's forehead. Her son would grow up in a world where different peoples could work together toward common goals, where courage and compassion were valued over greed and power, where justice wasn't just a dream, but a daily reality maintained by people who refused to accept that wrong was inevitable. As she turned to go inside, Anna paused for one last look at the stars. Somewhere in that vast sky, she felt certain her grandmother was watching over them, proud of the strength Anna had found when her family needed it most. Thank you, she whispered to the night, then carried her son inside to the warmth and safety of their hard-won home. The transformation was complete, but the story would endure not as a tale of mere survival, but as proof that ordinary people could create extraordinary change when they refused to accept injustice as inevitable. Samuel stirred in his sleep, his tiny hand closing around his mother's finger with the unconscious trust of a child who had never known a world without love and justice. In that simple gesture lay the promise of everything they had fought for, a future where children could grow up believing that right would triumph over wrong, and that communities could heal from even the deepest wounds, and that the most broken things could indeed be made whole again through the power of love, courage, and unwavering determination. The desert wind whispered through the community center, carrying with it the voices of two peoples who had learned to speak as one, the laughter of children who would never inherit the prejudices that had divided their parents, and the quiet satisfaction of a community that had chosen hope over fear, justice over convenience, and healing over hatred. Anna Whitaker closed her eyes and smiled her scars, finally, at peace, her son safe in her arms, and her world complete at last. The nightmare was over, the healing had begun, and the future stretched before them, bright with unlimited possibility.